Okay, our next speaker, and I want you to really give a huge cheer, is Wrack from the Fire Brigade Union.
How'd you follow that, by the way? Sisters and brothers, I bring solidarity, greetings from the Fire Brigade Union. It is an immense privilege, despite the appalling circumstances, to have got to know a bit and worked with the community of North Kensington and the community around Grenfell. It's been a privilege to have done that and to work with these amazing women who've organised this campaign, and they have our full support. Now, I'm going to say several things about what happened last year and what's happened since, and the people I represent, the firefighters. The first thing I want to say is the Fire Brigade Union is not the London Fire Brigade. They will answer for themselves. We agree with them on some issues and we disagree with them on many issues as well. But we represent the people who were sent into that tower that night, who almost to a person are members of a trade union, members of our union, the Fire Brigade Union. And I have to say, in my 35 years in this industry, I have never, because no one has ever seen in the UK something on that scale. And what they face, firefighters do deal with horrific situations, that's part of what they do, but no one has seen that, no one has dealt with that, no one has experienced that, and no one has experienced the aftermath of that. And I am immensely proud of those people and what they did that night. Now, in terms of our record, from day one, we said, as a union, that we stood shoulder to shoulder with the bereaved, with the community, and we wanted to see justice for that community and justice for those who had lost friends and family in that horrific fire. And our record is a long one. It's our centenary year this year, and trade unions are about pay and conditions, but the Fire Brigade Union has never been just about pay and conditions of firefighters. We have a record second to none of campaigning on public safety, whether that's the safety regulations in public buildings and your workplaces. When you look at fire escapes and fire drills that you now have, those were because people like us in the 1950s and 1960s campaigned to stop people dying when we had fires in factories and warehouses. And in the 1980s we campaigned to improve the furniture that fills our homes, to stop people dying from the cyanide that was in foam-filled furniture. And then we campaigned to go out and educate people about making themselves safer in their homes. So we have a record on that. And I want to, this past year, and people have mentioned it several times, the silent walks. I have been on many of those silent walks. I've been in politics since I've been a teenager, and I have to say I have never experienced anything as powerful as those silent walks. To see the numbers of people who turn out and to see an entire community fall silent in that way is one of the most powerful emotional experiences I've ever seen, and the one this week I think was truly remarkable. It's a tribute to that community and a tribute to the people who campaigned and stuck together throughout these difficult periods. And we saw that also in the aftermath of the fire. I attended the Grenfell Tower fire. In fact, I was there the day that Theresa May turned up, and I was there the day that Jeremy Corbyn turned up, and even at that time you could see what a sharp difference between the two visits, both inside the cordon where firefighting operations were going on, and also of course out in the community where Theresa May didn't bother to speak to the community. She now says she regrets that. Well, I have to say, it's a year too late to regret it. And we saw a magnificent community response, but we also saw appalling failure from those people who are supposed to be in authority in local government and yes, in central government. But we did see ordinary people sticking together to look after feed and clothe and take care of each other, and that was remarkable to see. I want to say something about the firefighters that night. The firefighters attending Grenfell Tower faced an impossible situation. We don't know, we've not heard the evidence. You've not heard the evidence as yet. I know some of the facts of what people faced that night. I have no hesitation at all in saying that each and every one of them went above and beyond what is required of them, what they're prepared for and what they're trained for that night. Firefighters have specialist equipment. You saw a turntable ladder just drive around the road earlier. Firefighters have special fire gear, they have breathing apparatus, they have other equipment. But they're not superheroes, they're human beings. They have procedures that are based on years and years and decades of experience. Sadly, all too often, when other firefighters have lost their lives, we make improvements to our procedures. And the truth is, at Grenfell, none of those procedures could be implemented because this was a fire that no one expected, no one planned for, and no one trained for. And so people in reality were making it up as they went along, using their experience to do their best as they could in an impossible situation. And the truth is this, and people have questions to ask, and we in the Fire Brigades Union are not afraid of those questions. People have the right to ask questions, and people have the right to ask difficult and challenging questions of the fire service and of firefighters. And no one is running away from those difficult questions, and that's what we face over the coming weeks. But I do take exception then to well-paid journalists who have never run into a building while other people are running out, telling us from their instant expertise that they're suddenly magically expert at the job that our people do, and telling them all about the failures they made that night. It's an insult. It's an insult, by the way, to those who lost their lives, and it's an insult to those who tried to stop people from losing their lives. And a period of silence from some of those people would be welcome. There are questions that have been raised about race and class, and they're obvious questions. I've got no doubt at all, it's glaringly obvious that what we had is a hostile environment for a working class community in North Kensington, and particularly because of where many of those people came from and their background. That's stark, staringly obvious to everyone. And in the fire service, by the way, we've got issues in the past about racism and sexism and other issues. I'll tell you our union's record. We've been on the front line many times of tackling racism and challenging and confronting fascism on the streets when necessary, and that's our record. But I will say this, that the London Fire Brigade is the most diverse fire service in the UK. And John McDonnell mentioned our conference earlier on. We heard from there at that conference. We have members of ours who grew up on that estate. We have members of ours who attended the fire who grew up on that estate. And the idea that they or anyone else was making judgments about people as they were trying to save lives, that is a disgraceful and disgusting slur on those people. And the missing question with all this debate around what the fire service did and didn't do in it, and the truth is, at every emergency incident people make mistakes because you're dealing with changing situations and very dangerous situations. But the missing question, and this is why people are trying to move the narrative on, as was mentioned earlier, is why were they even facing that situation? Yes. Because the fundamental question here is why and how can we wrap buildings in petrol in this country? And that's what happened at Grenfell Tower. They built a tower block in 1974 and they designed fire safety into that building, and people came along over the subsequent decades and wrecked it and put flammable cladding on the outside of it. And every time I think of it, despite being around this for many years, all my adult life, I still cannot fathom how we can do that in this day and age. So we have to ask questions about what happened specifically that night and in the run-up to it, but the deeper questions are, how do we even have a regime, a system of regulations, tests, inspections and enforcement that allows them to get away with what they did at Grenfell? And I'll say this, and some of you may have been at the meeting. I spoke at a meeting at the Maxilla a few months ago, and I read out a quote from my union from 1999, where, following a fire where flammable cladding had been applied to a building in Ayrshire in Scotland and one gentleman died, we made a warning about the dangers of flammable cladding on buildings and what that might do in the event of a fire. And we didn't make that to the fire service in Scotland or to the London Fire Brigade. No, we made that down the road in the House of Commons. This is supposed to be the heart of government. For people to say they didn't know about these risks is simply not true. The warnings were there, and we made those warnings. And we're in favour, where appropriate, of prosecutions. But let's not just go after the little criminals. We need to hold the big criminals to account in this process as well. And in the year since Grenfell, I've described, people say, how can this even happen? They talk about complacency. Well, for me, it is criminal complacency. And I've seen no change in criminal complacency in the months since the Grenfell Tower fire happened. And that needs to be challenged, and that needs to be addressed. We now have this inquiry. And I have to say, we've raised our concerns about whether that inquiry can fulfil the desire of the bereaved, can fulfil the needs of the community to actually answer the real questions and provide justice. Because we have our doubts about that process, although we are participating in it. Because they are inviting people to give them expert witnesses, for example, within the fire service, people who themselves have overseen years and years of cuts and deregulation in their own services, and then brought in to be expert advisors to that panel. And the question for us is, all those people who provided advice to government at every single stage, they need to be held to account as well. And all the ministers who've signed off regulations, they need to be held to account as well. And this is, people have mentioned austerity. Austerity undoubtedly is part of this, but this is a longer story than just the past 8 years. 1999 I mentioned, and we've seen deregulation in the fire service and deregulation in relation to housing for 30 and nearly 40 years. And governments of both persuasions have been responsible for that as well. And the Grenfell Tower inquiry will make recommendations. But interestingly, one of the questions they've asked us is, what are the previous recommendations that you're aware of that have been ignored? And the truth is, there are dozens of them. Sadly, we go to inquests for firefighters who die, and we find a recommendation made by a coroner. And we go to another coroner's inquest 5 years later, and another coroner makes exactly the same recommendations that they've been ignoring for the previous 5 years. So you will find at the end of this process that people were warned, that letters were written to government ministers and they were ignored as well. That's what I believe we will find in the course of this process. So the idea that we have faith and confidence that even if they produce recommendations, the government over there will do anything about it, I think we have to be sceptical. The only thing we can rely on is ourselves. The only thing that is going to bring change is organising ourselves to ensure that change is delivered. And that means, by the way, it cannot simply mean the community around Grenfell. It cannot simply mean the community of North Kensington. We cannot leave it to them. This is a national issue. We know 300 tower blocks, residential tower blocks with the same cladding, and a government that refuses to remove it or pay for it. A government that refuses to ensure that fire safety standards are applied in each of those. So we need to build a mass movement. This has been a great day today, but it's not enough. if we want to change things, we need to come back 10 times stronger than we did today. We need every trade union here at the next time. And by the way, if they don't listen to us, we don't need to just demonstrate. We need to stop this city still in its tracks.
Thanks.
That's the way we will win change. Solidarity forever, justice for Grenfell.
Thank you, Matt. That was an absolutely fantastic speech.